Hello, my name is Michelle, and welcome to the WorkMan application. WorkMan is a Windows 10 desktop application that allows for the simple creation, maintenance, and tracking of workflows. As we reviewed in video 2, My First Workflow, WorkMan can be boiled down into 3 simple steps. First, drawing your flow. Next, customizing your data. And finally, adding users. In today's video, we'll focus on the advanced aspects of the workflow creation canvas. Specifically, we'll cover how to create a fork and join workflow and how to set due dates on work items. Now let's get started by opening up WorkMan. First, I'll sign into my account by entering in my username and password. And from here, I'll get started on a simple fork and join workflow by selecting the New Workflow button. Now that we're here on the canvas, I'll create 5 steps. And I'll just keep the naming simple so we know what we're talking about. The first step here, I'll name fork. And our last step, join. These steps in between can simply be A, B, and C. Alright, so now I'll draw some flow lines to connect these steps. And the important thing to note here is that I'm using a single action in my fork step to connect to my 3 middle steps here, these A, B, and C steps. And from here, each of these steps will go into our join step at the end of our workflow. Finally, we'll finish out our workflow. Alright, so now we'll name our actions. This can simply be called split. I'll name each of these next. And then finally, after our join state, we'll be finishing out our workflow, so I'll just call this one finish. Alright, so now I've created a very simple fork and join workflow. But right now, just by creating the arrows, the workflow doesn't know that you want to join the single work item in this final step. Instead, if I were to publish this workflow right now, you would get 3 separate work items to the join state. So each of our middle states here, A, B, and C, would create a new work item. But there's a simple way to let the workflow know that you're creating a merge state. Simply double-click on the state and navigate to the join condition. And by default, you can see that the join condition is off, and we'll simply select it and turn it on. Okay, and so that's how you create a simple fork and join workflow. And really, to get the full understanding of what we're going to be doing here, I'll go ahead and add some additional fields to our data form. Specifically, I'll add in a checkbox, and then I'll add in a due date here. And the reason I'm adding in this checkbox is to really show that when we go through each of our actions, the data is recorded as in a single work item. So each piece of data that's given to us by action A, B, and C will be recorded all in a single work item. And we can see that visually with this checkbox once we publish the workflow. All right, and we'll also add in a due date here so that we can set a due date for the work item in question. Okay, so before we get started, I do want to kind of take another look at the due date that we just added in. And there's 2 main ways to set the due date for a specific step. And by default, each step is due in about 7 days or a week from when the work item arrives at the step. And to edit the due date, simply double-click on the state and page through to the due date logic aspect of the state properties. As you can see, here we are in our default that after 7 days, the due date, the work item is due, or I guess the action is due on the work item. And this can be changed to minutes, hours, months, years, and any combination that you might need by simply selecting these arrows here, this plus and minus button, and then this drop down. Now for our case, we have a due date in the data form. So what we want to do instead is use a due date per the date control. And just to really explain that here, when you have multiple date fields in your data form, you can select one of them to act as your due date, to set when the when the user must complete the action for that work item in a particular step. So we'll go ahead and select our due date, and there's only one option, so the drop down only has one option, and that will be the due date for our fork, and we'll go ahead and do it for the join state as well, and we'll set it to due date. Okay, great. So now that we have everything, we'll name this workflow Advanced Flow and publish it. Now that our workflow is published, we'll navigate to the home page, select the name of the workflow, and select the Initiate New button. All right, so we'll just give this a simple title, call it New Workflow, New Work Item, I guess, New Work Item, and we'll set the due date for tomorrow. All right, and with that, we'll start our workflow. And as expected, the work item appears in our fork state. And the one thing to really notice here is the tile. The tile is yellow instead of green because the due date is in the near term. Add a little description here. Select our action. Select Submit. And as expected, our new work item shows up in step A, B, and C, tile colored green, because this work item now has 7 days for the due date by default, since we did not change those states. So we'll go ahead and go into each work item, select our action, add a little description, select Next, and I'll do that for steps B, and then for step C. And as you can see, everything really is one work item. All of the data is being stored together, just as we want in our fork and join workflow. All right, now that A, B, and C have all been executed, we're in our final step, the join step, and we can select our work item, see all of the information, and that the due date is reflective of the due date in our date field. And you can see that down here, and this is also colored yellow to indicate that it's soon, that the due date is soon. All right, so I'll go ahead and select our finishing action. And as you can see, my inbox is now empty. All right, so to recap, we covered how to create a fork and join workflow and how to set due dates on states within the workflow. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoy the WorkMan application.